Pender, Bladen, Columbus, and Robeson counties are under a tropical storm warning. Many more counties are under a tropical storm watch, covering a broad swath of eastern North Carolina, the Sandhills, and most of our coast. Tropical storm force winds will begin arriving in our state overnight. Parts of our state still reeling from Florence could see sustained tropical force winds from Michael. Winds will be strong enough to bring down trees weakened by Florence, especially with saturated ground. Winds will be strong enough to rip tarps from roofs on homes damaged by Florence. Coastal areas can also expect storm surge and coastal flooding. Beaches already weakened by Florence's towering surge may be especially vulnerable. Rain will increase across our state today, with the hardest rain expected Thursday and Thursday night. As much as 7 inches of rain could fall in some areas, and the whole state will be getting some rain. Heavy rain could cause flash flooding and river flooding. And if you live in an area where flooding has happened before, you need to keep a close eye on the forecast, and you need to be ready to evacuate if you're told to do so. The last thing people cleaning up from Florence need right now is more wind and rain. But this storm is coming, and we will be ready for it. This morning, I've declared a state of emergency for Hurricane Michael. This allows state resources to be used to help local governments respond to the storm. I've also ordered that certain restrictions for trucks and heavy equipment be waived. This helps storm response vehicles moving in and through our state, and also helps farmers who are yet again working to move crops and livestock ahead of the storm. I have activated the National Guard. 150 National Guard troops will report for duty this afternoon. We are grateful for their service. And again, this week, we mourn with them the loss of Sergeant James Allen Slape, a member of the North Carolina National Guard, who fell while serving in Afghanistan last week. I talked to his family yesterday. They are all in our thoughts and prayers, and we are grateful for their sacrifice and Sergeant Slape's bravery. So now, to tell you more about the efforts to prepare for Hurricane Michael and what you can do to prepare, here is Emergency Management Director Mike Sprayberry. Mike?
Thank you, Governor. Good morning, everyone. The State Emergency Operations Center will raise its activation level up to a 3 today at 1 p.m. This means we'll be operating on a 24-hour basis and have the NCEM team and other members of our State Emergency Response Team here at the EOC, as well as our FEMA liaison, to ensure that we are prepared to respond to the impacts from Hurricane Michael. We continue to monitor Hurricane Michael closely and remain in close contact with the National Hurricane Center to ensure that we have the latest data. State emergency assets have been called and alerted and are prepared to deploy as needed. As the governor noted, we have positioned North Carolina National Guard soldiers and vehicles in key locations throughout the state to ensure that they can be ready if needed for flood response operations. Our logistic warehouses have been activated in the event that commodities are required. We all need to remember that while this storm won't be as powerful as Hurricane Florence, when it reaches us, it will still be dangerous. It can cause power outages, downed trees, flash floods, tornadoes, and riverine flooding. Let's ensure that we're all prepared at the individual, local, and state level. To that end, we make the following recommendations. Please have your family emergency kit ready and make sure it's been restocked if you used it during Florence. If you have questions regarding what should be in the kit, download the Ready NC app on your smartphone. It'll let you know what should be in the emergency kit. It'll help you locate open shelters and provide you with other preparedness tips. You should also use the NCEM Flood Inundation Mapping and Alert Network, known as FIMAN, to ensure that you are aware of potential flooding in your area by logging in at fiman.nc.gov. That's fiman.nc.gov. You can also sign up to be alerted by text or email when the rivers or streams begin to rise near you. Also, follow the instructions of your local officials and stay tuned to local media to make sure that you have situational awareness. And as always, thank you for your support of the North Carolina State Emergency Response Team. Thank you, Governor.
Thank you, Mike. We have part of our Hurricane Michael response team here, and we'll take any questions about Hurricane Michael that you might have for us. Anybody?
Any idea how many? I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Any idea of how many houses right now are blue tarped in eastern North Carolina? And what are you doing about folks who actually may be threatened in this storm from the wind and rain because their homes are whole?
So we are still in the process of providing more tarps to the counties as requested, so we don't have a really strong number about how many folks have a blue tarp on their roofs, but we're still working closely with the counties to provide them as requested.
One of the reasons for the warning today is to let people know ahead of time that this may be a problem. I've seen a lot of blue tarps as I've traveled across the state. A lot of volunteer groups are helping people get their homes back, and many contractors are out there, and so we're providing them the warning that these tropical storm force winds could cause problems there. Yes, sir.
Two quick things. The state of emergencies for the entire state?
Yes, it is.
And then, I don't know if this is for you or Mike, regarding shelters. Do you envision or have a contingency plan to reopen shelters? Do you think it's going to be that level of rain or wind or damage that could warrant that?
We're prepared to open more shelters as necessary. There's still 11 shelters in operation from Hurricane Florence. I'm not going to say whether or not we anticipate opening more. It just depends on how the storm acts as it moves through the state.
Michael Highland from CBS 17. Are you all making any recommendations regarding the state fair beginning tomorrow and people who may be traveling while this storm is coming through?
We have not made any recommendations regarding the state fair.
Given that probably some of the same people are involved in the initial responses are involved in the recovery, is this delaying anything with Florence, whether it be moving people out of shelters, any of the number crunching that has to happen to get the money flowing? What sort of setback is this for Florence recovery?
Well, we know that people who are trying to fix things on the ground and trying to find people places to live, that this storm complicates things. But if you'll stay for my budget presentation, the fact that we have now had 2 major storms within 23 months, we want to do a little something extra regarding making sure that we can focus on recovery while still being able to respond at peak capacity to the response in a storm, since both of them are centered right here in emergency management. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that in my budget proposal.
I know during Florence, roads were a big issue. 995 was closed for a period of time. Are you preparing to do, are you or NCDOT preparing to do anything special ahead of Michael to make sure these roads are, make sure people don't travel on roads that may be damaged?
The Department of Transportation will be on ready to deal with flooded roads as conditions warrant. They're still making some repairs on roads. We had 2,500 roads that were closed in Florence. They've done a remarkable job getting many of them back up and running, but they will be prepared in the event that we have any road closures from Michael.
How much do you think that will set things back in terms of repairing those roads?
We'll just have to wait and see how severe the storm is. One thing that's much more positive about Michael than Florence is that it's scheduled to move through the state at a much more rapid pace, leaving less rain. The potential rainfall totals have crept up a little bit overnight, but still the storm is anticipated to be gone from North Carolina by Friday. And we think that that will be a positive when we're talking about overall rain totals that could affect flooded roads.
You said that you haven't made any recommendations for the state fair yet. Are you guys watching that? Is there any plan for that if things were to get pretty bad on Thursday, opening day?
You know, Commissioner Troxler and his department are working on the state fair, and I would direct those questions to him. I imagine that if wind got to a certain situation, they might deal with certain rides, or I don't know the answer to that. I'm speaking out of my league, so you'd have to talk to Commissioner Troxler. Okay, thank you very much, and I appreciate Lee Williamson providing American Sign Language, and I appreciate the tremendous work that this team has done during Hurricane Florence and now as they get ready for Hurricane Matthew. So thank you guys. So now I want to talk about the Florence budget. Florence was an epic storm that brought unprecedented widespread disaster. Although we mourn the 40 storm-related deaths, we know that flood mapping, monitoring, preparation, early warnings and evacuations, and rescues saved countless lives. Our thanks go to the coordinated efforts of our Emergency Operations Center and our local, state, federal, volunteer, faith-based, and business partners. The human suffering and property damage left in the wake of Florence was like nothing we have ever seen before. Our efforts in recovery must be just as unique and bold. Our recovery should reflect the determination and the unshakable will of North Carolinians. I've been visiting a lot of people in the impacted counties, first responders, volunteers handing out hot meals, families surveying devastation to homes, businesses, churches, and farms. I've heard heartbreaking stories of loss, amazing stories of brave rescues, and inspiring stories of resilience. A senior I talked to in a shelter told me about being rescued from her home by a brave firefighter in Wilmington while water rushed in under her door. All the possessions she had left sitting in that shelter were carried out in her hands within 15 minutes. Although she now had next to nothing materially, she sat there, looked at me, and thanked her God, her friends, and the volunteers for helping her. So many of the men and women working at shelters or at 911 centers or local emergency operations centers or as first responders had their own flooded homes and families to worry about. But they knew that they had to pitch in and help their communities. They were doing their jobs. Now it's time for state government to step up and do ours. An unprecedented storm requires an unprecedented response. When you've had two 500-year floods within 2 years, like we've had in North Carolina, rebuilding smarter and stronger isn't just an idea, it's an obligation. With this obligation in mind, we've assembled a smarter and stronger state budget recommendation for Hurricane Florence recovery. Our preliminary estimate of damages in North Carolina from Hurricane Florence totals almost $13 billion. Florence has caused as much damage as Hurricane Floyd and Matthew combined. Now, some of that damage is covered by private insurance, and we'll continue working with our congressional delegation to maximize the federal help. But we know that we will be left with unmet needs, and our state needs to step up. To do that, I'm recommending a long-term $1.5 billion funding package that will ensure that we are rebuilding stronger and smarter. Next week, I'll ask legislators to make a $750 million down payment into a Hurricane Florence recovery fund, so we know that the funds will be there when we need them. My state budget director, Charlie Perouse, is here to go through with the details, and I'm grateful for the work that he and Deputy Directors Kristen Walker and Nels Roseland and their team have done. But I want to first touch on some of the key recommendations that I'm offering today. Providing safe, affordable homes is the single most important need. It's an existing challenge that this storm magnified. My recommendation includes a homeowner repair and rehabilitation fund to repair and sometimes elevate and fill gaps that other funding sources don't cover, along with increased funding to the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency. One of the best ways to mitigate damage is to avoid rebuilding in flood areas. So I'm proposing more for the State Acquisition and Relocation Fund to offer home buyouts as a supplement to federal funds. I grew up in eastern North Carolina, and as a kid, I worked on the farm. I visited a lot of farms. Our farmers were devastated by Florence, on top of the tough times that they have suffered through in the last few years. I recommend a robust North Carolina Farmer Recovery and Reinvestment Program run by the North Carolina Department of Agriculture, which would provide direct payments to farmers for equipment and crop losses. I also know that just like homes, businesses, infrastructure, farms need to be more resilient. We need to create a North Carolina Farmer Resiliency Fund that would expand the voluntary buyout program for hog farmers in the 500-year floodplain, or to convert from open lagoons to environmentally superior technology. In addition to damaged homes and farms, Florence caused more than 2,500 road closures, including Interstates 40 and 95. Our Department of Transportation worked overtime to fix them. But we have to focus on making our roadways more resilient. I recommend additional funding to leverage federal money to design roads, bridges, pipes, and other structures to better withstand extreme weather events. As we've learned after Matthew, many of our state's towns and counties need assistance in administering federal funds. In some cases, the money that they receive for their damages may be larger than their annual budget. Even when buyout and repair money is approved at the federal and state levels, local governments sometimes struggle to distribute it to people because of the lack of personnel and expertise in doing this. Today's recommendation includes funding that can help local governments run these vital federal programs and hire people to get the job done. This funding is in addition to our proposed grants for local projects like water, sewer, sidewalks, and stormwater drainage. Now, we know that Florence hurt education as well. There are more than 680 public schools, 28 community colleges, and 4 University of North Carolina institutions located in disaster counties. As of today, 7 school systems remain closed, keeping more than 130 schools out of operation and nearly 90,000 students out of class. On Monday, I directed $25 million from the Education Lottery Fund to speed repairs at public schools so they could reopen. They need the money in the bank in order to let the contracts. I'm proposing significant help for all of these education institutions. And when we're thinking about the future, there's more we can do to prevent the overall damage from flooding. During Florence, we know that our flood mapping worked to help save lives. As rivers were rising, emergency managers and first responders could evacuate people before their homes filled with water. I recommend updating flood modeling capabilities that expedite potential real-time impacts to homes, roads, and utilities. Today's recommendation also calls for beginning mitigation projects along our rivers. Finally, we have a hard-working staff at Emergency Management, led by Mr. Mike Sprayberry, who focus every day on disaster recovery, while at the same time being responsible for immediate emergency response, like we just saw with Florence and like we're starting to do with Michael. With 2 back-to-back storms and another one heading here even today, we know that we can expect more extreme weather events. To put laser focus on recovery after the response, we're creating an Office of Recovery and Resilience to serve as a sister organization to the Department of Emergency Management. With this, we can help draw down more federal resources and ensure that money is getting to the people who need it as quickly as possible. Today's budget recommendation is a robust and common sense approach to Hurricane Florence recovery. It's one piece of the recovery puzzle that's vital to seeing the whole picture. We'll continue to work with our federal partners for resources that North Carolina desperately needs. We'll continue seeking help from private and nonprofit sources. But it is imperative to set aside state funding to make sure that North Carolina is made whole. I'm grateful for those who worked long hours to put together this damage assessment in record time, state agencies, schools, economists, and local governments, and especially our state budget and management team that I mentioned earlier. I am committed to working with this legislature to ensure that North Carolina is a model for how we can rebuild smarter and stronger. I'm now going to call up Charlie Perouse, who is going to brief us with some more details and funding totals. So Charlie, you want to come on up? And before that, because I will leave when Charlie begins, he and I both will take questions that you might have. And Charlie will also take questions after his presentation.
So questions now?
Yes, for me.
I'm sorry.
And if I may need Charlie to help me supplement.
Okay, I'm sure some of these questions will be answered with Charlie, but so you're talking about asking for $750 next week.
That's right.
And you want 1.5 billion, excuse me, I assume for what, in the long session in 19 or?
So it'll be over a period of time, and I think we can work with how that is going to be distributed. And for this $750 million, part of it would come from the rainy day fund, and part of it would come from budget overages that Charlie can tell you about.
No taxes increase required.
No.
And then also, have you presented this package yet to the legislature?
On the staff level, we have, yes.
And what has been the response? I'm sure we can ask, but.
I think they are looking at it. They are getting a lot of the same information that we are. And this is my proposal that we put it out early enough so we've got time to work on it before they officially go into session next week. because I'm sure they're going to have some suggestions about what we ought to do as well.
Governor, at the legislative hearing yesterday, I think it was, there was some concern about the agriculture package that was presented, concern about oversight and checks and balances and all that. Are you building that into these programs, and you think you can assure legislators who are having some kind of squeamish about that?
I believe that we are at a unique period for North Carolina agriculture. The culmination of damage that they've suffered from the trade wars to Hurricane Matthew and now hit by Hurricane Florence. Many of them will be teetering on the verge of going out of business. So I agree with the commissioner that we need a robust fund to provide direct help to farmers that are not covered by private insurance and federal funds. And I've talked with the commissioner about this a couple of times. He is working on a fair way to distribute it. I support this effort, and you'll see that in my budget for that particular fund. We're recommending $200 million, but Charlie will tell you about that.
Governor?
Yes, sir.
I believe the permitting process for the lagoons is underway. When you talk about buying out, will that be used as some sort of leverage, that re-permitting process that happens every so often to push farmers toward that?
You know, I'm going to let the Department of Environmental Quality address that because they're responsible for the permitting. But we know that removing some hog farms from the 100-year floodplain was successful. We think that if we expand that to the 500-year floodplain, we'll have more success in moving hog farms out of harm's way. And we want to combine that with incentives for switching to environmentally superior technology. So that would be part of this fund effort as well. And remember too, we're talking about trying to provide clean water to people. The hog lagoon spills cause problems. Wastewater treatment plants, our local municipalities spilled into the rivers. We've got to help them be more resilient, and our package provides for that. So there are a lot of challenges in flood-prone areas, and we need now to be more resilient in all of our wastewater, both animal and human.
And then connected to that, is there any desire or willingness or maybe even a necessity to lift the moratorium on new lagoons in order to get them into a different geography, into a different place?
Well, I think that's thinking a little bit far down the road. I would not say we should do that at this point because we are going to be talking about more buyouts, and we're going to be talking about environmentally superior technology and state funding for that. Because remember, when you're talking about environmentally superior technology for hog lagoons, under their contracts, this falls on the farmer and not on the company. So we need to help when we're encouraging this to happen, and we need to help when we're encouraging buyouts out of the 500-year floodplain.
One of the concerns about making buyouts work is having a place for people to go.
Right.
And is part of the housing plan moving forward with building housing to help these folks have some place to go when you're buying them out and staying in their communities?
Absolutely. A lot of, in order to have buyouts in communities, you have to get the local government permission for this to happen. And many of the local governments are concerned about losing population when buyouts occur. So what we want to do, though, is to encourage more buyouts and or elevations in areas where that would happen, because I saw a lot of the homes that had been elevated in prior storms that avoided damage in Florence, and so now they are not in our damage column. So we know that this works. But with buyouts too, there can be other places where towns can go. Already in Princeville, they've had a number of buyouts they've made. It was a tough decision for their local governments to make, but they finally decided on some buyouts, and now there's a 53-acre contiguous tract where they're going to work to try to move some people from that historic town to this place. So there are ways that we can get people out of harm's way while still creating affordable housing. And through the Housing Finance Agency, through programs that have been set up through the federal and our state efforts, if we work on it and we fund it and we get it going, affordable housing can help our economy soar, and it can get people living conditions that they deserve. This was a problem before the storm, and this storm magnified it. So now let's take this opportunity and get people out of harm's way and get them into other affordable housing. We can do that.
With the understanding that this is in a lot of ways a neighborhood by neighborhood and a house by house process, what is the philosophy as far as, do you see people resettling from these buyouts in the same basic area? Do you see them moving to the cities? We talk a lot about how the jobs are in the big cities in North Carolina and not in the rural. Do you see any sort of an exodus, a reshuffling of population because of this?
You know, I think that you're going to have some people moving out of flooded areas just simply to escape the floods, with or without buyouts, because we've got a situation where more of our area is going to be flooded. We want to encourage people to stay where they are. Local governments want to encourage people to stay where they are. So there are ways that you can build affordable housing in these cities and towns that could help keep people there. We saw in one town in Edgecombe County where people had gotten flooded a couple of times, but a new HUD housing project had opened up and several of the people moved there. It was only a couple of miles away and in the same county, in the same community. So a lot of people want to stay where they are, near friends and family, and we want to try to encourage that.